This is the God Will Restore radio broadcast. We are thankful that you are here. We are opening with the day of inspiration. This is truly a day of inspiration. We have and anticipate as far as the music is concerned is that it builds up. The build up has to do with anticipation, expectation that something is about to change. My idea for 2020 is that there is indeed plenty. And that begins with being more, doing more, having more. There's a formula, there's a process, there's a pattern that is involved with the change that we have in mind and that taking place in the life of an individual. And so this podcast that we're working with, what I want to do today is to begin to lay the foundation for what we'll do pretty much all year and really going forward, period. This entire time that we will spend together. I've looked at what I said and presented in the last podcast, and what I'm seeking to do is to speak with you about change. And it's vital that we speak to individuals who want to change. And change can be prompted by a number of things, as we said on yesterday, on the previous broadcast. Change can be prompted by things that you look in the overall world as you see it right now, whether it's in your country or in the global society, or it could be prompted by something that's going on in a state or in a county or in a city, or it can be an individual, their family, it could be in their church, in their community organization, or it can come and be within a person's own family and then the individual, whatever level that the change is prompted, whatever that takes place, wherever that is, that change being prompted at that place, you look and you see and recognize that something could be different. Something could be other than what it is at this particular moment. So it becomes, how do you bring about that change? How do you make that change? How do you actually facilitate that change so that it is brought about? And the formula that have come up with, the pattern that a person is able to work with in order to bring about change, we have said that there is a process that is involved with bringing about that change. And it begins with a desire. That's the first D. There are 4 Ds that we work with as we begin. That desire has to be something that becomes definite. And you identify, you might call that a goal-setting process that you're working with in regard to that, a goal-setting process that you're working with. But the desire becomes definite. So there's something specific that you have in mind, and you can set that out in such a way that it could be a short term or long term. And we have, as we say, a strategic life planner by which an individual writes down their change that they want to bring about, and then they also write down the deadline. It is called in this day and time the aspect of SMART goals. And those goals, SMART means S-M-A-R-T. It is specific, it is measurable, it is attainable for you, it is realistic for you, and then it is time bound. So they are SMART goals. And the reason for that is that you are motivated to achieve those goals, because everybody knows now it's February the 1st. As far as this particular year is concerned, this particular moment in time. But whatever time you're listening to this particular podcast, it could be a year from now that you're listening to this particular podcast. But you know that people set goals, and you may be an individual, as I have done in the past as well, where you set a goal and you say, I'm going to do any kind of change. It could be losing weight, whether it's 5 pounds or 50 pounds or whatever it may be, or gaining weight, whatever that may be, or it could be that you're going to make a certain amount of money, get a different position, that you're going to be healthier, eat better, whatever it may be. Get a position, make a certain amount of money. All of these are goals that individuals set. And then over the course of time, you try it for a period of time and then stop. We want to make sure that an individual, you, because you're listening to this program, you've been led here, we believe, by God, by Spirit, and that you have in mind that you are definite by the statement, by your willingness to follow through. You're saying something that you desire to do. You're definite about it, and you write that down. That's the reason for getting the planner, sending to I Will Restore sending to info@iwillrestore.com, so that you get the planner and you write that down, and then it becomes more concrete for you, not just something in the mind. You write it down, and you write it down in such a way that it's a SMART goal that you're working toward. The third D is that it's divinely intended. I believe that there are laws that the universe works by. This universe that we have, you look at summer and you look at the fall, and then that's followed by winter, and that's followed by the spring. That happens every year. You look at the way that the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. That happens every day. So there's order to the universe. There's order to the universe. And there's order, I believe, to one's life. There's an intention that is involved with one's life. And so we say that the third D is divinely intended. You want to make sure within yourself that what you're doing is divinely intended, so that you're in harmony with the universe, or as the text says within the Bible, all things are working together for your good, so that you sense that as something that is happening, and that you can find a place of peace no matter what is going on around you. Find a place of peace. You can sit and breathe and know that it's going to be all right. Things are working together for your good. And then that, when I say sit, that's like that statement that says go into your closet, or get in a quiet place, or do what is called mindfulness or meditation this day. You do this, and move to what we call the fourth dimensional level, where you move into a space where you can be quiet and calm, and that you can rest and relax and be in the silence, not just silence, but you can be in silence and make that connection with spirit. Make that connection with spirit, with the very source of oneself, the very source of oneself, that which is within you, which has never been born and will never die. That which is within you, that has no beginning and has no end. That which is within you, that is always light and never dark. That which is within you, which is the I am. The text says that God breathed into the human the breath of life. The breath of life, made in the divine's image, and God breathed into the human the breath of life. And so being in that space where we talk about this fourth dimensional is being in contact with one's source. That's what we're talking about there. So that's the first part of the change. And this is about moving from a status of being a victim to being one that is a victor. Moving from a victim to being not just a victor, but a thrivator, as I call it, or being somebody that's not just a survivor, but a thrivivore. So you're going to thrive in life. You're going to excel in life. You're going to be more than you thought you ever could be. The text again says, far more abundantly above anything that you might ask or think. You'll be surprised at how the world opens up before you as you follow these steps. This is what we're talking about here. And this is a moment, this is a time, this is a year, plenty in 2020. This is what we're talking about as we go forth in regard to this. So these 4 Ds. And then we have what we call a 12-step process. And we're laying this out. We may put different clothes, if you will, on this idea that we're working with. There may be different clothes that we put on it, and we may call it at different times the inner journey of self-awareness to become your authentic self. We may call it the inner journey and give it the idea that it is the Star Wars edition. We may have the Black Panther edition. We may just have the inner journey of self-awareness and just leave it at that, to become your authentic self. And those are the clothes or the names that we use, but at its core, it is this framework that we are working with. And part of that framework is that we're working with a number of items to begin with. Let's begin with the first 4. The first one is that a person assumes 100% responsibility for his or her life. Remember, we just talked about moving from being a victim to a person that constructs in their mind the life that they desire. They are going to live it from the inside out, not from the outside in. They're going to live it from the inside out. Now, that's the first thing. 100%. Now, you may have seen yourself as a victim up to this particular moment in time. That may be something that has taken place in regard to yourself. Or you may be someone who looks at it and say that I want to begin from now or sometime in the future, and I will be in charge of my life. Whichever, whether it's past, present, and future, you decide when it is that you will say that I'm in charge of my life. You decide that. You make that determination as to when it is that you are in charge of your life, how that actually works for you. And so you go forth in regard to that. But the key is that 100% responsibility for your life. That's a step. And all of these are not, perhaps not one of these are instantaneous. They are steps. And there's a process that a person may go through in order to bring about that particular change in his or her life. So to be aware of that, to understand that, that's why there's training that goes along with what we're talking about, so that the training can take place with an individual and they are able to understand what is taking place in his or her life. Because some people, this will be almost like a form of entertainment for them. They'll hear it, forget it, and then go have dinner or the church potluck or whatever it may be. Just eat it, then forget it. That's it. That's the end of it. And that's good for them. But what we want to really talk about is that we want to talk to the individual who absolutely wants to change. They want the end of the year to be different from the beginning of the year. They want the end of the week to be different from the beginning of the week. And that change begins in that individual. I had the opportunity a few years ago, and I still have the book, but it changed my life. I read through the book, understood what it was saying. It was called The Training of the 12. The Training of the 12. It talked about the ministry of Jesus the Christ, and what it did was it showed me that Jesus's ministry, Jesus's training class, was primarily to the 12 disciples initially. It was primarily to those 12 individuals, because he knew if he could get a core group of individuals who would listen to and absorb what he was teaching, those individuals who came back to him and said, "How did you do what you did?" Because others thought it was just simply something that was like magic. He fed the 5,000. They thought it was magic. He would raise the dead. They thought it was magic. And many people still today think of it as magic. They think it was something that he could do, but they could not do. But the truth of the matter is that science has caught up with Jesus the Christ. And that's what happens when something is scientific, is that there are few people that initially teach it, that practice it, but after a period of time, science actually catches up, and you find people actually doing things like the restoration of limbs and the restoration of organs and all of this kind of stuff. The things that Jesus did is being done all over the world in this particular time. All over the world is happening in this particular time. Science has caught up with Jesus the Christ. Because Jesus was truly, if there's ever been a scientist that has walked this earth, it was Jesus the Christ. No question about it. And so to be such, one has to receive training. And he trained those disciples that he had. The Training of the 12 is a book. You can find it online. You can buy it probably from Amazon. You can download it from Gutenberg, I believe, if you like that particular PDF, that form. And read it through. You will find it fascinating, because the moment those individuals, Peter, James, and John in particular, met Jesus, the moment they met him, they knew that there was something unique and special about this individual, and they stayed with him. They asked him questions. They inquired. They did not just see what he did. They asked him, "How did you do that? Why did you do it that particular way? What is the meaning of that particular miracle that you did? What is the meaning of that act?" And they were able to understand the principles behind the actions of Jesus the Christ. They were able to actually understand the meanings, the reasons why it was done the way that he did it. And therefore, when Jesus Christ was no more in a physical presence with them, they were able to do the miracles as well. They were able to do the miracle. Was he the first one that did it? No, not even in the biblical record. You'll find that Elijah and Elisha also did similar miracles. So you read that and understand that. The same thing applies today, is that actually, if you look at the individual named David, David did the same thing. You recall that David was in what they call the cave of Adullam. David had slain a giant. That was something that nobody else had really done before. So he knew in the heat of the moment how it was that you go through a process to calm yourself in such a way that it made it possible for him to stand there and wait to the crucial moment, the critical moment, and to be calm enough, to be trusting in spirit enough, to be trusting in God enough in such a way that he was able to deliver that critical blow and to slay the giant. He understood that. As a result of that, there were others that came. They were in the cave of Adullam when David was considered an outlaw, somebody who was an outlier, if you will, if you use a scientific term when it comes to those things that we do when we study statistics. He was an outlier, and he was someone who was doing things differently. And he, in that cave and in that cave-like environment, that community is set up, he taught these men and they became his mighty men. They became his mighty men. So again, it's the same idea. And so what we're talking about here is an individual who comes to the point that they take responsibility for their decisions. It may have been someone who was abused, who previously had lost their voice, their identity, their time because of what had happened to them. But now they arrived at the point where they want a new identity. Where they're going to get it from? They're going to go inside and understand who they are, why they are, how they've come to be here at this particular moment. And they know that there was a design that took place. I will tell you that in my life, there's been pivotal points that I knew that I did not set up. Let me tell you about one of those times. When I was in high school, I had gone to a predominantly African American school for the first 10 years of my life. And then I met a young lady, thought I was in love and everything like that. And there were some things that had happened with my father, and I decided that I wanted to go live with relatives of mine. I lived in the city, and the relatives lived in the country, and I thought that by going to live in the country, I would be able to actually be near to this young lady. I didn't have a car or anything like that, and I thought I'd be able to go live with this young lady, or live near her, not live with her, just live. I didn't have a car, and so I could get on the bicycle perhaps. It was a pretty good distance even there, but I thought I would be near her. And I also thought that I would be able to go to school where she went to school. And I had been told that I would likely go to college after school because I had taken a certain test and all of those things. And there was a set of curriculum courses that I needed to take as I went into the 11th grade, one of which was a course called chemistry. I needed to take that course in the 11th grade. And so I went to live in the country, and I went to school the first day. When I went to school that first day, I went to the counselor, and I said to the counselor, I don't even think the counselor had my records at the time. I said to the counselor I needed to take chemistry because that's what my advisor had told me previously. I needed to take chemistry in the 11th grade. Now, chemistry in the school that I left was taught every year. But chemistry in the school that I was going to, it was in the year 1968, 1969. I was going from the city to the country, as we called it, to the suburbs today, perhaps might be a better way of looking at it. And what I was told was that the chemistry teacher also taught physics. And he taught these two courses on a rotating basis. One year, he taught at the predominantly black school, chemistry, and physics at the predominantly white school. And the next year, he switched it. Then the switch, I got there the year that he was teaching physics at the black school. He taught chemistry at the predominantly white school. Because I didn't know any better, I just simply said, okay, I need to take chemistry first. So I went, prior to what I had thought I was doing, what my plans were, I went to the predominantly white school in the 11th grade. It was a change in my plan as far as I knew what my plans were. I did not understand the full implications of that change of plan. Because going to the new school, I met a new set of friends that literally end up changing my entire life. End up changing my entire life. And it was in line with my being able to go to college, which is what my intent was. And it made the likelihood of my going to college even stronger. And I did eventually go to college, did eventually go to the very school that I had anticipated going to, one of them that I had anticipated going to, but I did not know at that time that my going to that school was really being engineered by a force, by a power, by God beyond myself. That's powerful. That's powerful. And so, again, I did make the decision to move from, as I say, the city to the country, as far as I know. But there's something beyond. There's one that says that when you make a decision that you want to bring about something, there are forces that are unseen and unknown at that particular time that come to your aid, that work in your behalf in order to bring about the change that you want. That's what we're talking about. You're making the decision. You're saying you want to be here. You don't necessarily know how you want to get to there. That's what we're talking about. You're being definite about the desire that you have in mind. You're writing it down so that when you look at it, you'll know that that's where I want it to end up. You might not necessarily know every road and every turn and every whatever. You have an idea, but you are willing to allow spirit that knows far more than you and I might know to have free reign when that is the time for that. So the first one is you take 100% responsibility. That means past, present, and future. You don't see yourself as a victim. You're responsible. And so you might look at the past and say, I didn't have any control over those decisions or whatever. Well, find the places in your life where you did make a decision. You did make a decision. Even in the midst of traumatic experiences, there are some decisions that are made. So vital that you understand how that is done. And then the next one is, number 2, in regard to these 4, is blame no one. Blame no one. And I say blame no one thing, not self, not God, not parents, not environment, nothing. Blame no one. Why? Because it's likely that not one thing, not one person is responsible for anything that happens in life. Blame no one. Blame no one. Again, this is part of taking 100% responsibility for one's life. 100% responsibility for one's life. And it's a way to look at the world. It's a way to look at one's life. It's a way to begin and to assume the power that is normally stolen in the midst of a traumatic situation. You feel that you're under control of something or someone else. And this is the aspect of releasing blame and assuming power, your own power in regard. Blame no one. And this is done from the inside because that's where the power really lies. It's your ability to actually live a life of power. So blame no one. The third one is forgive everyone. And I'm going to say that a number of times. Forgive everyone. Forgive everyone. Forgive everyone. Forgive everyone unconditionally. Give forth love to everyone. And again, the statement is that these are steps. These are a process that a person goes through. This is a process that one goes through. There's training that's involved here because this may not be instantaneous. It is difficult to say the least. I read book after book after book after book, went through a process and had to do it over and over and over again in order to actually arrive at this point. This is something that Spirit gave me, and I had to read and study because I had blamed a lot of people. And still, it is something that is ongoing. I am still practicing. I'm not there all the way yet. And sometimes when I'm being blamed, I feel like I need to blame somebody else for what has happened to me, but blame no one. This is vital. This is vital. And then finally, in regard to these 4, and then we're going to play the music again. The aspect is you join or form a beloved community. Join or form a beloved community. Remember, this is a framework. that we're going to then, it's like a skeleton, we're then going to build on as we go forth. But get this framework down so that you understand how it is. It's like the framework for a house, if you will. And then we're going to add different things to it. I've made these particular presentations. I made these particular presentations so that they are unable to be downloaded. So if you've tried to download them previously, these particular items are not able, you're not able to download them. You either listen to them and then take notes, or if you want them later, then I will have to actually have your email and then make them available to you so that we have a way of being clear on actually who has this material, because this is a training process that we are doing, and it's vital that we have some way to actually understand and track what we're doing. This is going to be very valuable to anyone who actually uses this material. It will change your life absolutely. So listen to a bit of music and see how this works out for you. Just think about it, pray about it, and then in a few presentations, we actually have it so that individuals can call in, speak with us, and see where we take all of this together on this journey that we're doing. Here's the music. Now, as we work now with what we're doing, I'm going to mention the other items that we work with. We've given you, at this point, 8 items, and then we have the other items that go with this, which we call the 8 A's of transformation. I actually previously called this the 8 A's of the restorative model of ministry model, restorative ministry model, restoration ministry model. Call it now the restoration ministry model. In addition to that, call it the 8 A's of transformation, because what we're working with is transformation of the individual. And there is a number of items that we work with. My own 8 A's, which is 8 A's of transformation, we'll talk about that. But for the next few moments, I want to talk with you about a couple of theories. One is called the constructive developmental theory. The constructive developmental theory. And it's constructive in the sense that what we're talking about is an individual being able to construct his or her life. It's developmental in the sense that it is a process of growth or development. Now, it is a way of looking at the world. And again, this aspect of how an individual brings about change in his or her life. Now, when we speak of this developmental process that we're talking about, when you speak of growth, a person can grow. Let's look at it in this way. A person can grow, say they can grow wider, or what we would call laterally. They can grow in regard to that. So they can grow laterally. And a great example of this is the presentations in the book. There's a book by an individual named John Maxwell. And the first chapter, he talks about the law of the lid, the law of the lid. I'm a John Maxwell coach, certified coach, and he talks about the law of the lid. And in that particular chapter, he has a chart where he speaks of this aspect of both lateral growth, or what we call horizontal growth, and you just grow in regard to knowing more, so to speak, on the level that you are. You grow in regard to that. But there's also what is called vertical growth. And you're growing in regard to levels of leadership. You're growing in regard to what he's speaking about. It is levels of leadership. So his specialty is leadership. And he speaks of the importance of growing vertically as being more important at different periods of time than growing laterally. Now, what we're saying there, and we'll come back to this in a bit later, is that the developmental that I'm primarily working with has to do with this particular type of development. A person growing vertically. They're growing vertically. The way that they see the world, the way that they process reality, so to speak, the way that they process reality. So vertical growth, constructive developmental theory. So they construct it. It's done from the inside, as we were talking about, and then it is vertical. So we've already talked about how that is done. You redefine what you desire. You begin to understand that you're not a victim, you are victorious. You begin to understand that you're not someone who has simply a victim. You are an agent of change in one's own life. All of those are significant changes in regard to how you view the world. Each one of those steps that I've just mentioned, those have to do with growing vertically. When you no longer see yourself as a victim, that's a vertical growth. When you understand that you have a voice, that's a vertical growth. When you understand that you define your own identity, that's a vertical growth. When you understand that you can determine time. So rather than constantly repeating the same story in your mind, you can stop that story and define a new story and repeat that story in your mind, and then your outward reality will conform to the new story that you are told, that you have told yourself is true. Your outward reality will conform to that. The biblical statement puts it this way: it is done unto you as you believe. Let the weak say, I am strong. It is all the same thing. You are constructing your reality. You are constructing it. Those are vertical growths. So that's what we're talking about here in regard to constructive developmental theory. And it's the reason why it's called a theory is because the aspect that each person must prove, remember, is subjective, is subject to you. If you don't prove it, then it's not true for you. But if you prove it, the statement says, prove me now herewith, said the Lord of hosts. That's the way it's there. You have to prove it. Each person has to prove it. You have to test it and see if it works for you. And if it doesn't work, don't do it. Don't do it. Find something that works for you. Because as I say, this may not be for you. This person might, by way of speaking about it, may not be for you. There's no compulsion here. There's no need. There's no desire for everybody to see it the way I see it. I don't have any desire for that whatsoever. I'm not even speaking and trying to find everybody to speak to. No, that's not what this is about. My only desire is to find those who are looking for me and to be able to speak to those individuals who can hear the word at my voice, who can hear my voice and know that it is a voice that they have been looking for pretty much all of their lives, because that's what the law of attraction is about. My parents would say birds of a feather flock together. And so that's what we're looking for in regard to this. And you may know somebody. One of the things that I did in regard to one of the persons I met at a particular time, we had a conversation about some professional things. And at the end of that conversation, we started talking about myths. We started talking about Star Wars. We started talking about Transformers. And there's a whole process that I go through in regard to that. And because that person was able to keep up in regard to that particular conversation, that person became a friend that remains a friend to this day. Because birds of a feather flock together. That's the law of attraction. That's how that works. People who think alike. They like being around each other. They like having conversations with each other. And so that's how that works in regard to that. People think it's something else, but really it is birds of a feather flock together. And so this is what we're talking about here. And so when we talk about this aspect of a shift in perspective, that's what we're talking about, that you begin to see things different. And the main thing that a person sees differently initially is him or herself. You begin to see yourself not as a victim, not as someone who is powerless, but as someone who is powerful. And you begin to take your power. Again, the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People mentions this, and it talks about the circle of concern, and then it talked about the circle of influence. And it says your initial circle of influence may be very, 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 very small, even a minute small. It's a minuscule amount of power just to be able to just wash your face when you say, I want to wash my face. Or as I said, one time I shaved and I thought I could just shave my own face. But yeah, people had comments about that. But I discovered it was my face. It was my face. And so you get to the point. Again, one of the decisions I made in life, I remember I was coming out of high school, and I did graduate from high school. I was the first of my mama's children to actually graduate from school. And when I went to join the Army, because I figured at that point in time that I needed to join the Army in order to get the GI Bill, in order to go to school, to go to college, which is what I wanted to do. And when I graduated from school, I went to join the Army, and I was initially rejected from joining the Army. They told me I could not join. Why? It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough. I passed the test. It wasn't that I wasn't fit enough. I was able to do most of the things that had to do with fitness. However, what I did have was I have double thumbs on my right hand. And the person that examined me said initially, says, you cannot come into the Army with those double thumbs. You cannot come into the Army with those double thumbs. Now understand that all of my life, there had pretty much been a period of time where I had been picked on and actually gotten in fights because of my double thumbs. When I was out with young ladies, there are times that I would actually cover my double thumbs up, all of this kind of stuff because of the aspect that I was different. I remember that some of my friends actually at one point in time when I was much younger actually tried to pull my double thumbs apart. Why? Not because they were mean or anything like that. They wanted me to be just like them, but I wasn't exactly just like them. And so now the United States Army was saying that I was not acceptable because I had double thumbs. And then one of the doctors said, I tell you what, you come back and see a specialist, but I had to wait 6 months. I waited 6 months and I came back. And I saw the specialist, and the specialist gave me a test. And what he did was he asked me to take my hand, it's on my right hand, and now understand that I know now that there are a number of people that have what we call 6 digits on one hand, on one foot, whatever it may be. There are a number of people in the world. There's a percentage of them that have this particular item, but then I thought it was only me. And he said, take your right hand, and then he said, I want you to touch every other finger on your hand with your thumb. And I was able to do that. And I was able to do that with each one of my fingernails or each one of the extensions on my thumb. And I was able to do that. And he gave me a choice. He said, this is what your choice was in that time. He said, I can cut your thumb off and give you one that looks good, but it won't work at that time. Now, this is not today with the prosthesis and what they have today. I mean, the stuff they have today is just wonderful. I saw a man who had bionic legs and was able to climb mountains and stuff like that. I mean, today we got some amazing things, but at that time, he said, I can give you a thumb that looks good. It looks like everybody else's thumb, but it won't work. Or you can keep the thumb that you have that works, but it looks different from everybody else. When he gave me that choice, I thought about it, and I made the decision that I would keep my thumb. I'm not a victim. I didn't know the words then, but I made the choice. And I thought that was the end as far as my going into the Army. It had delayed me already. I said, that's the end of that. And he said at that point, I can sign a paper and you'll be able to go into the Army. And that's what happened. The delay set me back, but I was able to go into the Army. So what we're talking about is the aspect, again, of a person owning his or her life. And then as they own their life, you look at the points where you make decisions and you recognize that you're elevating. You're beginning to see the world differently. And that's vertical growth that we're talking about there. That's what we call perspective change or awareness or awakening. That's what we're talking about in regard to that. That's cognitive development. And that can be facilitated. And I'll talk more about that at a different time. But as we go forth in regard to that whole piece. And that's why we've given you these steps. And if you're still with us at this particular point in time, even if it's not for you, you may know someone who is crying and weeping and complaining and just not happy with life. And they think that it's the government's fault. They think that it's their relatives' fault. They think it's what's happened to them in life. They have all kinds of reasons why they are not excelling in life. They can be in the north, the south. They can be in parts of Africa and Asia. They can be anywhere in the world. And there are all kinds of ways that you can look at life and say that life is not fair, because life at a certain level is not fair. But inwardly, you have the power to change your life. Inwardly, you have the power to change your life. And it's not magic. It is a mystery, but it's not magic. People have done it all through time. This is where the kingdom is. This is the kingdom. And so if you have not heard it, or they have not heard it, this is it. This is it. Share it with them, please. And so cognitive development, cognitive, meaning thinking, brings about constructive development. Now, I'm reading an article. This particular article is also talking about a different theory. It is called transformative learning. And the article is actually from an item called the International Journal of Coaching in Organizations, IJCO. Transformative Learning and Appreciative Inquiry, incorporating coaching and action for deep organizational change. And as I've said before, I am a student at Walden University. I'm doing a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. That means it deals with organizations. I've already done a DMin at Howard University School of Divinity and Masters of Science Telecommunications Management at the University of Maryland Global Campus, as it's called now. So I've done a bit of schooling, and I've pastored for a long time, about 40-some years, so worked with individuals. And even now, in regard to what I'm saying, let me preface that by saying what I've said before. And I want to do that by looking at the back of one of my books, which is called the Steps to Christ Study Workbook. And I'll mention this as we go forward. In the back of one of my books, it says the book Steps to Christ is about changing the land by changing the man or the woman, the boy, the girl. The Steps of Christ study workbook guides you in digesting and distributing the food for change found in the classic volume, the volume being Steps to Christ. By opening up for investigation old ideas and stimulating new thoughts, you are planting the acorn of truth in the midst of the people landscape of the world. The acorn idea of acknowledging one's need for help, the acorn idea of repentance, the acorn idea of life first and then growth to follow, planted in the center of your being, ensures massive, great, tremendous change and development. So, my friend, a better world is within you. In your hands is the key, the passport, the seed, the acorn, the beginning you need to get us all there. And what that is talking about is the aspect that change begins, whether it's in an organization, whether it's in a family, whether it's inside of a church, a community, or whatever it may be, change begins with the individual. And that idea is found in writings. You can go back to the writings of Emerson or whatever it may be, and you can find it in writings ancient. Change begins with the individual. And so initially, we're talking to one person, seeing that individual, if they are ready, if they feel and sense that the moment of change is ready for them. And that individual then may touch another life and bring about change. And when those two begin to change together, then they can bring about greater change and still greater change. Again, that's why Jesus Christ worked with those initial 12 individuals. They started out with 3. Then they grew in the number. And this is the same thing that, as I read in regard to this, listen to this: transformative learning and appreciative inquiry, incorporating coaching and action for deep organizational change. Well, this item begins with the aspect of that change begins with an individual. And it says, reading from it, it says, building from the notion that perspective transformation is essential to organizational change at both the individual and group level, it is critical to understand how best to support this requirement and at the same time allow for participation and knowledge of the system to be shared and understood. Given that a shift in perspective is the outcome of learning, we propose that theory related to individual learning in the midst of change can provide a conceptual platform from which a group process can be proposed with similar intent. And so what the individual is saying in this particular item is that the individual changes first. See, people want change, but they want the whole mass of people to change. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. The person, the individual, the David, if you will, has to step out and face a Goliath first and not be afraid of that Goliath. Whether that Goliath is seen as external to them or internal to them, that person must deal with that Goliath because everybody else is too fearful. And it doesn't matter what the group is. We all have certain fears. I tell people that I've died a number of times. I've had to stand in the midst of a situation, and in the midst of that situation, I've had it where I've spoken up and done something that was contrary to what certain individuals of power thought should be done. And there's a price that is paid for that. Whether your name is Galileo or whether your name is Jesus Christ, whatever your name may be, doesn't matter. When you step, you know something is right, you stand on principle, and you step, you must be prepared. But when you know something is right, I wrote today that statement that was said, I initially thought it was said by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was talking about the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But I actually understood today that he was quoting a man named Theodore Parker. This particular individual also had a quote that was very similar to the one that Dr. King made. And his was written years before. Years before. He was a thinker, very much like Emerson and others, thinking. And he began to look and to see and to understand that there's order in the universe. And he knew that sometimes that he saw that things in society in his day and time, he was living in the 1800s and 1830s and stuff like that. And he saw slavery in the United States of America and all of this stuff. And he saw the way that things were taking place. And he took a principled stand against those things. And he looked at it, and when I say looked, I don't mean that he saw physically or visually something. He saw in his conscious mind, in his consciousness, he understood that there's order in the universe. And he said, the arc of the moral universe is long. And I can't see it with my physical eyes, basically. But in my consciousness, I see that it bends toward justice. In other words, people that think they're getting away with doing wrong, they're not getting away. They're not getting away. Don't ever think that they're getting away. If you look at it, you'll discover they're not getting away, and don't let anybody convince you that they are. Wrong when it's wrong is wrong. Again, that is a movement of constructive development. It's vital that an individual grows so they'll be able to stand in those crucial moments, those vital moments of life. It's just needful and necessary. And then when it comes to being a company, we want companies to have valuable products, but in order to have valuable products and services, they need values. Just makes sense, doesn't it? In order to have valuable products and services, they need people with values. And in order to, whether that is a company or a country, they need people at the top who have values. That's vital. That's vital. And the more people that are intelligent in regard to this, I mean, there are people that are all over the world who stick their head in the sand, and they feel like what was in this movie, I can't handle the truth. Yes, you can. If you're listening to this, then you need to be able to handle the truth, not just somebody else's truth, but the truth about yourself. That's what we're talking about here, the truth about yourself. Handle the truth about yourself, the past, the present, the future, the truth about yourself. Let me tell you, there's nothing greater than you inside of you. I love, again, the Iyanla Van Zandt said, I did my work. It's the same thing here. You got to do the work. You got to do the work. You just got to do the work. There's no way around this. This is not for babies. This is not for people who want magic. This is not for people who will not do the work. No, this is not that. This is not that class. This is for grown-ups. This is for grown-ups. This is transformative learning theory is an adult learning theory. It's an adult learning theory. It's for grown-ups. And so it's talking about the individual changes and then lays a pattern by which the organization changes. And so it lays down this process. And I mention these because you can go and look these up. You can do your own individual research in regard to this. I've taken a number of years going through the process. I've studied theology. I've studied psychology. I've studied mythology. So I've studied a number of fields in order to arrive at the understandings that I had. I've waited a long time rather than just come out and say this, that, and the other. I've written books and Bible studies and all kinds of studies in regard to this. So I've taken the time to actually go through a process in order to understand what I'm talking about. And when it comes to coaching and praying and affirmative prayer, all of these techniques, I've used them. I've seen what a person would consider to be miracles take place. People came and said that, my life is on the line. I'm about to die. Would you pray for me? And I've seen those people. Some of them are still alive today, nearly 40 years later. Persons that I met in 1986, and one individual that I can think of right now that he came and said, would you pray for me? And discovered that, after we prayed and everything like that, he had, at the point that he had a type of blood cancer, I believe it was, but he is still alive to this day. To this day. So we've seen miracles that have occurred, miracles. And we thank God for the technicians, the medical improvements, and all of the stuff that is taking place. God is everywhere. Indeed, all there is God. God is everywhere. And so we're talking about this aspect of constructive development and transformative learning theory. And we're going to, in this particular presentation, what we've done is that we've talked about the 4 Ds. We've given you another 4 items that you can contemplate. And again, we have processes like when it comes to forgiveness, there is a item that we use that we give to individuals that they fill out names, sheets that they can actually fill in names of people that they want to forgive, because this is a process. This is not magic, and it can be difficult and challenging, and that's why we talk about join a form beloved community. You want to be somewhere where you can be beloved regardless of what your level and degree in this process, in this journey is. You want to have someone who's affirming your value even when you are unaffirming in who you think you are, who are going to encourage you in your journey. And so we are here for you in regard to that. We've done it before in regard to the Steps of Christ study workbook. And let me just mention this. We initially did this study, and I apologize in a certain kind of way about this because, again, the work that we've done has literally changed the lives of people significantly. It is one thing when you change a person's life who has been a victim before, a victim. They've been a victim. There are marriages where one of the partners is a victim. And when that person becomes empowered, the other person can feel threatened. Seen that happen as well. But through study, because this item says, this aspect, this article that I'm reading, it says the outcome of learning is a shift in perspective. Learning. When you learn something new, remember, transformative learning theory is a change, is an adult learning theory. And the outcome of learning is a change in perspective. You're going to see things differently. And one of the ways that that change is facilitated is when you empower people to read something, and they read something and study something, and stuff that they already knew, they begin to give new meaning to because they see it differently. And the Steps of Christ study workbook helped individuals to actually study the steps that one takes to become a Christ-like person. And as they studied, they, again, got their voice. So people that were in the studies, sometimes because they studied before they came, they did not have a voice in those kinds of settings before, but they studied, and we were all on the same plan. And then they spoke up in the midst of study time, in the midst of the gathering, the community gathering. And they had to be heard because they had answers that were meaningful. They got the voice back. They had a new identity. They had a new definition of time because they took the time in their days before we met in order to study the material. It changed their entire life, and it changed the entire community that we were in. It was amazing. Before I was even exposed to this theory, I had already experienced the theory. That's why I love the theory. That's why I love the theory. And I use this book in order to do this. And really, it is almost as if Spirit has sat on me and said, you've got to do these programs. You've got to do them. You've got to do them. You must absolutely do these programs. And you've got to get this in another form rather than just having this inside your own mind, inside your own head. Because I saw people change. I experienced the change and was changing myself, becoming more and more empowered, more and more awake. So it's not something that I'm just theorizing about anything. I have seen this stuff work. And if it works for 1, and then 2, and then 3, then it will work for 10, and 20, and 30. And then it'll work for 100 and 1,000. It will work all around the world. And the Spirit says, this is about more than you. It's about change. It's about change. So I want to encourage you to share this or to invite others to listen to it wherever you're listening to it at, to actually share it. And again, we'll pick this up either later today or there'll be another broadcast. But for right now, I'm going to close this down and do it again with the music. And it has the upbeats and everything like that. But just think about what you've listened to, the 4 steps, if you've taken notes. And again, if you send us an email at info@iwillrestore.com, then we will actually get the material out to you. And we'll talk. We'll have a conversation. And the vital thing is for you to have a desire for real change in your life. How invested are you in the aspect of bringing about real change in your life? That's what you need to know first. All right. Take care. Blessings. Bye-bye. Let me do one thing here. Let me start this over. Let me just for a moment. I like the way it starts. I want to do that. I had it turned down. I like this space right here. That's your new life. See the build up to it.